Okay. So we are doing a presentation here on a research project that we did with SARE, the North Central Sustainable Agriculture and Research and Education group. It's part of the USDA, I believe. And we got a farmer and research grant to study double crop sunflowers in northern Illinois. And so this is part of that research is we have to make our research public. And so this is us fulfilling that role. And this was a research that we did in 2021. In a perfect world, I would have done this last winter, but for a variety of reasons, it has actually worked better to present this winter. We have a little bit more information. So a little bit about us. We operate under JL Acres LLC. So there's three of us brothers, Jacob, Joshua, and Jonathan. And we are somewhat managing two operations. We manage our own operation as well as our parents' operation. And they're milking about 60 dairy cows, plus the heifers, dry cows. We feed out about 30 steers or so. Those are not organic. And so in total, this year, we're going to be covering about 1,000 acres certified organic, and there's a few transitional acres in there as well. And we are located in what I call Northwest Illinois. So Whiteside County, Lee County, Ogle, and Bureau counties. In general, we are somewhat close, but on both sides of Interstate 88 in Illinois is kind of how I'd characterize us. Our family transitioned to organic around 2008. My brothers and I came back to the farm in the 2017, 2018 time. And so our operation as a whole, growing up around organic, and then since coming back to the farm, we have experience growing your normal corn, beans, both food grade and feed grade, soft red winter wheat, oats, the hay for the dairy, of course, as well as field peas, sunflowers, and a variety of different cover crops we've tried over the years. We've also tried a few oddballs here and there just to see what they would like. We've grown spelt before on a small scale, as well as barley. Some of those are a little bit harder to market, but the ones that I have listed there are the primary ones that we've grown as cash crops. So as we began to think about some of the challenges that we have in an organic farm, especially a couple years ago, we were a lot smaller. How can we get more use out of the acres we have? We know that successful organic farming relies on diverse crop rotation to manage fertility and pests and weed control, things like that. And so we all know that the corn, beans, small grains is kind of the stereotypical rotation in the organic system. And the small grains is great in there for the weed control that it adds, and it adds the diversity that's great for the system. But especially in our area of Illinois, small grains are really just a break even at best type of crop. And we are in an area of Illinois. We're not quite as bad as Central Illinois, where the cash rent bidding wars go on up to $500 an acre. But rents are very high in our area of Illinois. And so small grains, they can often be break even at best. We're just far enough into that humid area where getting the food grade premiums for the small grains can be a big challenge. So what are some other options to bring more profitability to organic farming? And so one thing that that people often talk about is growing fertility with your small grains. So you're frost seeding your clover underneath the wheat or oats or whatever it is for a following corn crop. And that's great. It saves on your fertility costs for the corn. But in areas like ours where there is high land cost, the fertility that has grown does not always offset that loss in profit. And especially if you are not quite as established of an outfit as my brothers and I were when we were starting, sometimes you just need that cash flow to be able to keep things rolling on the farm. And that can be hard when you have a loss in one segment of your operation. So the other option, depending on what type of farm you were or are, cover crops can be grown after small grains for grazing or forage, but not all organic growers have livestock or access to these forage markets. Now, there are some places, and maybe you are part of those, maybe not, but you go a little bit further south of us, and soybeans are definitely an option for double cropping behind winter wheat. But we are just on the edge of that. I would say maybe 2 out of 5 years, the soybeans behind wheat are a great option and they make a lot of money. And the rest of the time, they're barely break even. I know this year it just fell apart and there really wasn't anything out there. So it's a big gamble in our area. And then as you go further north into Wisconsin, it just becomes not really a viable option. So what are some other options for us organic farmers? I know some people are planting buckwheat after their wheat, but that can be hard to find a market for. Edible beans can be planted sometimes later in the summer, but those contracts can be very hard to get. I actually was trying to get an edible bean contract just a couple weeks ago, and they said they've already got 25% more contracted than what they need. So edible beans can be hard to get a contract for, and there's also that risk with defects and the challenges that harvest is just, you have to be more precise to not have a load rejected. So what are some other options? So what about sunflowers? That's why we're here today. Sunflowers can grow well with minimal moisture, as we'll see in a bit here. Sunflowers are more frost tolerant than soybeans. And there are different maturity ranges for sunflowers. So there would be an option that you can grow a shorter season sunflower or a longer season. They have the deep tap roots that can break hard pans, bring up minerals. There's companies that are actively looking for sunflower growers in this part of the Midwest. And then if you were, depending on your scale and what you wanted to do, there is possibility to direct market to consumers, either as a bird seed market or oil. And also we can just think about sunflowers are friendly to pollinators. They're great for the community, something different just besides the corn and soybean fields. We've had people ask about dove hunting, so there might be possibilities there. And just add some other variety to the rotation as well. So the question that we are looking at in this study is, can sunflowers be grown as a profitable double crop after winter wheat in northern Illinois, where double crop soybeans are not as viable, in an organic system? So the plan that we have here is we were going to harvest our wheat. We'll do a little bit of light tillage after the wheat to take care of any weeds. We plant our sunflowers. We had a contract with Purdue Agribusiness. We did some weed control passes. We side dressed, we'll side dress a little bit of nitrogen, and we'll harvest the sunflowers and then sell the sunflowers and calculate how well we came out in the end. So we harvested the wheat, we planted sunflowers. I'll say at the beginning that the wheat was fertilized with about 2 tons per acre of poultry litter in the early spring. So we know that is a slow nitrogen release source that would somewhat contribute to anything following the wheat. The wheat was harvested July 5th. We baled the straw off for our dairy. We lightly worked the ground July 8th. Already in 2021, things were dry. We were trying to really minimize losing as much moisture as possible. So we planted the sunflowers July 9th, 30-inch rows. There's the variety, around that 24,000 seeds an acre. And we rotary hoed July 14th. You notice there's a delay there. That's because we didn't get any rain in there, and so there was not a whole lot of issue with weeds coming. But when we did that rotary hoe in the middle of July, we knew something was not quite right. The stand wasn't there. Normally sunflower fields will look a little thin, but something wasn't right. So after doing a little bit of talking with some other people in the area and our representative, we found out that we actually got a bad lot of seeds. We had a very poor stand, and so that caused us to look at some different options. And eventually we decided we were going to try to replant the sunflowers a second time. And our people we had the sunflowers contracted through were very gracious with us and worked with getting us some different seed and things like that. So again, we were very dry at this point in the summer. So we decided instead of disking up the field and losing even more moisture, we were just going to aggressively drag the field to stop any of the small weeds and try to preserve some moisture. We replanted over the old rows to take advantage of the few sunflowers that were coming, kind of thinking that if we at least had some that was there and we had some that were coming between them, amongst them, we could take advantage of what was already growing. So we replanted our sunflowers July 23rd, which is very late. We planted Cobalt 2. We upped the population because of the later planting date. And that's how we ended up. Now, just to kind of show how dry the summer and fall was, you can see here the top line is comparing 2021 to this past year, 2022. So most of us can remember the weather we had just this past year. The next one there is looking at the average for the last 5 years. So you can see from July 1st to November 20th is when we harvested them. We were well below average in the precipitation that we received in that time. These numbers come from, we have an account with FBN, Farmers Business Network, where I pulled these numbers from that field. To kind of visualize that, I have this graph. I got this from Eric Snodgrass, who's an awesome meteorologist. He has a website. It's listed down there, ag-wx.com. You can go and search your area code. And so this is for 61081. You can see 2021. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but it was well below average in that area for moisture. We did get a jump of rain. I'm not sure if you can see that. Middle of October, we finally got about 1/4 of an inch of rain. All these other little jumps are less than that. They're like a 1/10 or 2. They're not penetrating. So bottom line, it was very dry. Most of the growing season for these sunflowers had suboptimal moisture. Just for fun reference, you can see the green line way up top was 2019. You can see that other red line right below it was 2018, showing how wet we were going into 2019. Just a fun historical thing. But you can pull this up on that website and see some of your own historical data. So that's what we were dealing with this field. There was a lot of things against us. We had late planting date on a replant. We had suboptimal moisture. And so these are some of the pictures of the field. I wish I would have taken a few more for comparison, but you can see we have a few taller plants that are there that were the first ones that were planted where we had some seed germinate. And then we had these shorter ones that were what we replanted. Most of these grasses, we did have volunteer wheat that was in there and a little bit of foxtail. For what we were doing, the ground got so hard and dry that we could not really cultivate and throw a lot of dirt the way that I would have liked to. But in general, I don't think the weed pressure hurt us as much as some of the other problems we had. So these are the sunflowers that came up first. You can see they're fairly decent sized heads. There's just a smattering of them across the field. Now, those were planted, as I said, July 9th, I believe, compared to the ones that were planted at the end of July. You can see these are much smaller heads, almost fit in the palm of your hand. So a huge difference in planting date in terms of what you can get for yield. And just for comparison, I threw this one in here. This was a field of full season sunflowers that we planted in 2021. This was a few miles away. You can see how huge those heads are on the full season sunflowers compared to these really late double crops and even these double crops that were in at a little bit more of an optimal time. So full season sunflowers can really put out there. So this is at harvest. Sunflower fields look a little dismal when you get close to harvest, but there's the field. So we harvested the field November 20th. The seed was around 14% moisture is what we're estimating. There was rain coming. It was time to get them out. We harvested them with our gleaner combine. It's an R62. We had a 25-foot just normal bean head on there. We blocked it up. We do have an air reel, which I think helps. We also did have a neighbor come in and help us. He had a draper head. And I think the draper head, if you have an option to use a draper head, that worked very well for sunflowers. And some of that had to do with the reel and the way that the tines on the reel flip around compared to our bean head with the Crary air reel. So some harvest loss, you're always going to have some of that. We stored the sunflowers in a bin about 3 feet deep or so. It was a pretty decent sized bin. We put air on it for a week or two. We dried them down to about 9%. Sunflowers do dry very easily. So even this late in the fall, if you can get air to them, they will dry fairly well as long as they're not too deep. If you have too much foreign matter, that can cause issues. So you might have to do a little bit of pre-cleaning or pre-screening, but they do dry pretty easily. If you pull up one of those grain equilibrium charts, you'll see that they're very forgiving in terms of the humidity and temperatures that they'll dry down to. So these are the numbers. This is what our study was all about. So the seed cost, about $1,800. I took our initial seed costs. The replant seed was free, but I decided I'd go with the initial seed cost just for the purpose of this research. You can see the fertilizer plus the application fee. We put down feather meal, 132 pounds an acre. And as I'll talk about, that did not necessarily help us at all. We have machinery and field operations calculated in there. And then we did have to pay the trucking to get the seed down to Georgia, which was a good chunk there. So the total cost for 30 acres was about $8,800 or $8,900. So the income yielded approximately 500 bushels an acre. The price that we had it contracted at was 38 cents a pound. We had a very good oil premium on there, or oil content, that gave us a good premium. So that gave us a total gross of about $7,000. And so then we lost money on this crop. Break even would have been about 200 pounds an acre more. So this is how we ended up. We lost money on this experiment. Thankfully, we had a grant to help do it. But their sunflowers were planted 3 weeks later than planned, well below average rainfall. Fertilizer. So we used feather meal, as you saw in there. Feather meal is a dry granular product, and without any rain, that fertilizer was not getting to the sunflowers at all. The truck to Georgia was only about half full, so very inefficient trucking cost in there. And I don't know if Paul Hoffman is going to jump on here or not, but he had similar seed issues to us, and he got a much more respectable yield off of his double crop sunflowers. So just for fun, I plugged some numbers in here. If we would have skipped the fertilizer, we were halfway through the summer. We said, okay, these are going in late, and it's not looking like we're going to have much rain. Let's just skip the fertilizer and save that cost. Just taking the fertilizer out alone would have saved us $2,500, and we would have been net positive for this field just by skipping the fertilizer, thinking, understanding that it wasn't going to have a good return. And then this was, maybe you could argue this one, but if the trucking was proportional to the volume, so we sent half a truckload, if we would have only had to pay half the trucking, then that helps a little bit more. So you add the fertilizer plus the trucking, and then you get up to a net positive of $75 an acre. So if we'd have skipped fertilizer, or even there'd be a little bit more of a conjecture, but if we would have had a fertilizer that was more available, that we could have gotten something off of, we could have looked at a different route. But if we would have skipped fertilizer, that alone, we would have broke even under this worst case scenario of no rain and late replant. So we could think about what would have been some other options for this field. We took the weed off. Well, if we would have put soybeans in, the soil was so dry, I doubt soybeans would have grown very much. And even still, they would not have had the rain. The rain that came in the middle of October would have been after the frost date anyway. Average frost in northern Illinois, I should say, is October 5th. So the rain that we got was right at or after frost date, so that wouldn't have helped the soybeans put on any more pods. We could have planted a forage there, potentially a sorghum or sudan, and hope to get enough moisture to get some sort of a forage off of there if we would have an option for that. Cover crops could have been an option. We had obviously enough moisture to germinate the volunteer wheat. I will say, though, about the cover crops, we had another wheat field about 1.5 miles away where we tried to seed cover crops after the wheat, and it really didn't grow. We had a radish here and a radish there, and it was dry enough that the cover crops did not really get established either. So we can think about, in this situation, even some of the other options would not have been favorable to us. And so if we would have had that first successful planting and not had bad seed issues, or if we would have even just gotten a more average rainfall, we likely would have been much more profitable with this experiment. So next time, if we would have seen the seed was not working right away, we could have gotten in there a whole lot sooner, planted a lot more on time. We could have looked at a different fertilizer program, something that wouldn't just sit on the dry ground, maybe some sort of a foliar program. And other than that, hoping for more rain to try to help out. So this study, in our minds, shows us that sunflowers can be a profitable alternative for double cropping in areas where double crop soybeans are riskier. And sunflowers, we saw that they are very resilient in dry weather. They can survive without very much rain. So that was good to see. And that even in a worst case scenario, sunflowers do have the potential to bring a profit if they are managed strategically, looking at your context and everything that you have going around. So obviously, for any research, you need to look at multiple research experiments just to quantify the costs and the profits over multiple growing seasons. You can't just look at one study. So just in general, some things with sunflowers I'll point out. When you're harvesting sunflowers, you need to pay attention to the harvest moisture and your storage needs. So as far as I know, in general, you are going to want to have a place to store your sunflowers. If you are close or can get trucking to Central Illinois, Midwest Organic Farmers Co-op does have storage available there. I know there are some people that harvest their sunflowers and truck them down there for storage. But you want to make sure that your harvest moisture isn't too dry that your seeds shatter and just go all over the field. But if or when you're harvesting them a little bit wet, you need to be able to get some air to them to dry them the rest of the way. If you fertilize too much, sunflowers can grow spindly and lodge and fall over, and then you're not getting the seed either. And obviously, having that bin storage space is helpful. Other questions just to think about if you are considering sunflowers in your rotation in any way would be volunteer sunflowers. Now, after this field, we came back with corn, and I thought we would have some issues with volunteer sunflowers, and we really did not. But I know that there are some people that have had issues with volunteer sunflowers, so maybe thinking about coming back in some way that you're either going to do multiple tillage passes to get those to germinate, and so you can take care of them, or soybeans you can go through easily with a weed zapper or hand pulling sunflowers. And then something else that we're kind of looking at is, are there other cover crops, or are there the possibility of clovers that could be seeded with these flowers? I think in a double crop situation, there's a lot of light, because the sunflowers are not going to grow as tall necessarily, that you could get some other cover crops seeded with the sunflowers. And then something else that would be an interesting study is, we know that when we plant a small grain or a wheat, we often see that a little bit of a yield bump with the following crops. So what happens if we have sunflowers in there after the wheat? How does that affect the yield or even weed control of following crops in the rotation? So just some other questions to think about. I'm also just throwing this slide in here too. We like to do different trials and research on our farm just for fun and to see if there's ways we can make efficiency, or it's always good to do research. So this last year, some of you might have seen we did some no-till organic soybeans doing 30-inch versus drilled into rye. We also did 30 inches versus drilled in a tillage system with soybeans. And maybe at some point I'll do a presentation or something recorded on that to more fully explain that, but I did chronicle that on our YouTube channel. The other thing that we're looking at to play around with is full season sunflowers and possibilities of interseeding those with cover crops or clover. And then we are working at trying to grow elderberries and getting them established and seeing what possibility for a market there might be for elderberries. So I'm going to, you can see my contact information there real quick. If I can pull this down. If anybody has any questions, I think I've got you all muted, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask some questions. I'll do my best to answer them. I'll say, as people think about questions, I know there was a question that came in on email about oil content and frost affecting that. What I discovered from a couple of different places, from North Dakota and Alberta, and maybe it was even Pioneer, that once the sunflowers reach quote unquote maturity, so it'd be similar to the black layer, the oil content is not affected, and the sunflowers are definitely good down to 25 degrees. So you've got a lot of room there. Before that, there can be a little bit of an oil ding from frost, but it does not seem to be like it is a substantial loss. The other question was about crop insurance on sunflowers. We are in an area where sunflowers are not an insurable crop, either for double crop or for full season. We are also, up until this last year and the Biden rule that expanded the area, or whoever made that rule, we were also not in an area where double crop soybeans were insurable. So anybody that grew double crop soybeans, that was also an uninsured crop. So, and I would assume the same would be for most areas north of here. So sunflowers are not insurable as a double crop or a full season in our area. But yeah, soybeans were not for double crop either. I think that was the main questions. I could check the email thread and see if there were other questions. Yeah, if anybody else has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Or I'm not sure if there's a chat option here too. You can try chatting and asking.
Jacob, this is Scott Robinstein with Purdue Agribusiness. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Scott?
Excellent job. Very, very nice experiment there, and we're glad to have you as a grower as well. So even through the challenges, I think you've captured the data um, and shared it really, really well because educating each other is what it's all about. So great job.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's always good, I think, just in general in agriculture to know your numbers. It's real easy. We try to sit down for each field and do spreadsheets on fertility and expected yield and stuff. And then we try to come back and plug in, look at our different receipts and see how things actually came out. But especially on these new crops, the yellow field peas, the sunflowers, it's good to know what actually the numbers are, what is possible. And I think, I just really appreciate that sunflowers can take a beating and you can still come out okay with them. Obviously, we decided that we would fertilize, and I think part of why we did that was just because it was part of the research, and we had that part of the grant money, so we threw that in there. But I think especially if you would fertilize really good ahead of your wheat, the sunflowers could do okay without any fertility, which makes them a fairly economical crop to grow after wheat. Let's see, another was bird predation a concern. Birds, I was really worried about birds as well, just from some of our full season sunflowers. And we did not have that issue or have not had that issue. I know some people talk about that being a problem. I don't know if we're just lucky or if we get out there just a little bit sooner. I know one of our farms is in a very kind of wooded area, and the deer can really cause a problem just walking through there, knocking down stalks. That can almost be a bigger issue sometimes than blackbirds or things like that. So I think if you get in there before they are really prone to shattering, you can get ahead of the birds a little bit that way. So yeah, thanks for that question.
Jacob, Scott again, you mentioned that the crop soybean and sunflower were not insurable. And was that in your county or in Illinois? Or I'd like to understand a little bit more about that. And
yeah, so we try to work really closely with our crop insurance agent, and I know he has some responsibility in some national committees, so he's fairly well informed. They are not insurable I'm going to say in this region. Insurability goes county by county, and so looking at all the surrounding counties and the counties we're operating in, they are currently not insurable. You can achieve insurability though if you grow crops for 3 years, and I don't necessarily think that they have to be successive years, and then provide that yield information to your crop insurance agent, and then they can take it up to the national insuring governing body and establish a yield history for you that then you can be insured off of. So starting out the first couple of years, you're not going to have that insurance protection, but you can build that if you're willing to, take a risk for a couple of years. So we have actually, and I'll feel free to ask more questions, but I'll just kind of talk a little bit about how we're thinking about sunflowers in terms of our overall rotation now. We have been growing full season sunflowers for a couple of years now, trying to build up that insurable net or that blanket, the protection. We're hopefully going to have that in another few years, but we are at a size that we can take, a 20-acre field and grow sunflowers and get some yield history there before we expose a bigger risk of, 80 acres or 100 acres of sunflowers. Because we are in an area where wheat just does not cash flow very well at all. It's almost, we don't make money growing wheat. But we do like to, you need a rotation in your organic system. So we have gone to replacing wheat, or the theory is to replace wheat with sunflowers in our system. Yes, sunflowers are not going to be, necessarily always that big money maker that soybeans and corn are going to be. But for us, in our context, they're not going to be a profit loss crop like wheat would be. So that's why we're kind of looking at sunflowers. The only thing would be, if you look at doing that, is wheat is just so nice if you have weeds and need it, especially ragweed, because then you can get in there and take out some of your weed pressure. Sunflowers, especially full season, they are going to shade out weeds, but ragweed can compete with them a little bit. So you do have to manage, kind of keep an eye on that side of things. So in general, we're looking at trying to replace wheat with full season sunflowers. just for kind of the cash flow and how our system is working. So we'll see how that goes over the next few years, and what prices do and things like that. That's kind of how we're thinking about sunflowers. And so then that leads me to our future testing that we'll do it. Is there a way we can get some other cover crops with the full season sunflowers to maybe build some fertility, like we can do with the wheat? So, yeah.
Hey, this is Michael.
Yeah.
O'Donnell. I work with a farm that's in Northwest Indiana, a little south of Rensselaer, and we've done the sunflowers for a couple of years, and we didn't double crop, but essentially a double crop. We intended to double crop behind some barley, but just logistically we couldn't get it done, just with other things going on. I know that Scott Myers over in Ohio has had a lot of success double cropping behind barley, and in fact, no-tilling sunflower as double crop behind barley. Just given how early barley can come off, third week of June for us. But we had a field that was volunteer rye, and we ended up just letting it go for a while as a cover crop. And mowed it off when some thistle in that field was, kind of at that bud stage, just to try to deplete it a little bit, and then cropped sunflower behind it and had success. Came off pretty late and had to put some air on it to get it down to moisture, but it was successful. I don't have all the yields in front of me. Still waiting to look at some of those from the year to compare all our different sunflower fields, that were full season versus these sort of quasi double crop scenarios. But it seems to be fitting.
Can I grab this 25 real quick?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Michael. I've heard people talk about barley, and I know like yellow field peas. There's some growers around here for those. The crops that get off just a little bit longer. It just makes a difference when you can just capture that much more sunlight, rather than getting when the sun is on its way down for shorter days. I didn't want to put numbers specifically in the presentation, but I want to say some of the local growers that have done double crop have seen over 1,000 pounds per acre. I want to say up in the 1,500 pounds per acre plus. So our little yield of 500 is really the bottom end, I think, just given how much struggles we had. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that there's other people having good success with double crops. And unfortunately, I don't have specific numbers to say what is possible, since we only had this 1 year of the double crop stuff. So. Awesome. Well, let me see if I'll stop the recording here.